Did you know that in his prime, Jeff Bezos was only ranked 12th on the Forbes real-time billionaire list? That means there were 11 other people who were richer than him. But compared to this man, Bezos was just getting started. You see, this man was once 3 times richer than Jeff Bezos. And if you consider inflation, his wealth adjusted to the US economy back then, it would have been much higher than even Elon Musk. He had more money than the GDP of 200 countries, and his wealth amounted to 1.5% of the entire US economic output. The crazy thing is that not too long ago, this man didn't have any money, and he was just a humble bookkeeper. So who was this mysterious man, and how did he make billions of dollars? To answer this question, we'll first need to go back to his humble beginnings in 1839, when he was born to a family of Scottish-Irish descent. His father was a traveling con artist who was constantly trying to scam people, while his mother was more of an angel who took care of her son, John. For the most part, his father wasn't a good influence on him. As he grew up, John witnessed his father trick people and sell fake lottery tickets. And because of all the traveling, he didn't have the opportunity to go to school. Even though John couldn't read or write when he turned 13, his father finally settled down and got him a job at a produce and commission store. There, he worked for very little money, but at least he could learn some new skills. By the time he turned 16, he was still working at the same store, but now as a bookkeeper. Meanwhile, his father realized that John was becoming a better businessman than him, so he tried to get closer to his son. In 1855, he lent John $50 to start his own business. Of course, he pretended that it was a gift, but John knew what was going on. So he started paying his father back with interest. During that time, the pair operated a small business selling produce, eggs, and butter. In 1859, the time came for John to strike out on his own. He left his father's company and opened his own modest brokerage firm. At first, he didn't make much money, but he saved every dime. A few years later, he had enough money saved up to take the next step. Meanwhile, America was undergoing an unprecedented boom after oil was discovered in Pennsylvania. Back then, it was considered a miracle substance. It could be used in lamps to light up rooms, prevent machinery from seizing up, and power whole factories. And the best part was that it was far more convenient than other energy sources like coal or wood. But there was one big problem. Nobody knew what to do with all the excess oil. They tried using it to lubricate machines, but it ended up ruining them. And it was also too dangerous to use it in lamps, so it wasn't until kerosene was invented that oil became popular. But while everyone was getting rich off the new oil, there was one man who was studying it closely. You see, unlike his competitors, John understood that the real money was not in selling oil, but in processing it. So when he heard about the latest invention, he immediately saw the opportunity. He went out and bought as many barrels of oil as he could and set up a refinery in Cleveland, Ohio. But unfortunately for him, he wasn't the only one who had this idea. In fact, Cleveland was flooded with dozens of independent refiners who were all competing for customers. To make things worse, the supply of crude oil was far greater than the demand. So prices were plummeting, and soon he was making almost no profit. John needed a new strategy. First, he tried cutting costs by building his own pipeline from the oil fields to his refinery. Before him, people either transported oil in barrels or used expensive rail cars. But he wanted to find a cheaper solution. So he assembled a team of engineers and designed the first pipeline network. This allowed him to transport oil over long distances without spending too much money, and it was such a success that he continued expanding the network. But that still wasn't enough to keep him ahead of the competition. He needed something more drastic. At this point, he was just another face in the crowd, but if he could find a way to stand out, he could earn immense profits. So he employed one of his greatest tactics. You see, John was obsessed with cost efficiency. He cut expenses wherever he could and reinvested the money into expansion. He was well aware that the competition was doing the exact same thing. So if he wanted to get ahead of them, he needed to think outside the box. So he focused on railroads since they were by far their biggest expense. After carefully analyzing the situation, he visited the railroad executives and proposed a deal. He guaranteed that he would ship hundreds of thousands of barrels of oil every month, but in return he asked for an exclusive discount. At first, the executives laughed at him, thinking that he was just another ambitious refiner. But when he mentioned that he would guarantee massive shipments, they started taking him seriously. And eventually they agreed to the deal. This meant that he would pay less per barrel than his competitors, giving him a huge advantage. But that was just the beginning, because his competitors were not able to secure such high volumes. They paid full price for the railroad shipments, making it extremely difficult for them to turn a profit. This gave John enough time to buy out 22 of his 26 rivals in Cleveland within 3 months in 1872. At first, he tried buying them out, but when that didn't work, he simply bankrupted them. But before he destroyed them, he offered them a choice. Either they could sell him their businesses at a loss, or he would crush them and they would lose everything. Most of them chose to accept his offer, and soon he owned most of the refineries in Cleveland. But he wasn't done yet. He repeated the same strategy in other parts of the country and gradually bought out the competition. Soon, he had a monopoly on American oil refining, and he could control the entire industry. But this led to a massive lawsuit and eventual breakup of his empire. You see, the more successful he became, the more people hated him. He was seen as a ruthless businessman who crushed anyone who stood in his way. In fact, someone even wrote a book called The Octopus, which described his evil empire. It portrayed him as a greedy octopus that sucked the life out of small businesses and controlled the entire oil industry. And because of all the hate, the government sued him for violating antitrust laws. In 1911, the Supreme Court ordered him to split Standard Oil into several smaller companies, and that marked the end of his empire. But despite all the controversy, one thing is for sure: John was one of the greatest businessmen of all time. He built one of the largest companies in the world and pioneered new technologies. He also expanded to other industries like banking, but he never achieved the same success. After all, he will forever be known as the man who built an oil empire and made billions of dollars. You know how people say money doesn't grow on trees? Well, for the Rockefellers, it actually did. And not just a little bit. We're talking about an actual fortune that grew faster than any other before or since. If you were to add up the net worth of the richest Americans today, they only come to around $800 billion. But back in 1913, one man alone had more wealth than all of them combined. And by a lot, we're talking almost twice as much as the next 3 richest people combined. His name was John Rockefeller, and if you've heard the phrase, "A dollar earned is a dollar kept," you can thank him for that. In fact, he became so powerful that politicians tried to take him down, but he always managed to come out on top. Today, we're going to show you exactly how this rich list billionaire built such an unassailable position of power, and then, even when he lost everything, still ended up with more than anyone else. We could start with his legendary business acumen, but there's no denying that his original source of wealth came from nothing less than pure monopoly. You see, at the time, everyone needed oil, and Rockefeller owned nearly every single refinery in America, meaning he controlled prices across the entire country. It was only a matter of time until the government got involved. And in 1911, the Supreme Court ruled that Standard Oil violated the Sherman Antitrust Act. So they forced the company to break up into 34 independent entities. That might sound like a defeat. However, this wasn't the end, but rather a new beginning for Rockefeller, because now he was free from the intense pressure of running his massive empire. He finally decided to retire and instead focus on what he loved doing: philanthropy. He started the Rockefeller Foundation in 1913, and over the years it has concentrated on public health, education, and scientific research. For example, he founded the University of Chicago and played a pivotal role in developing the first polio vaccine. He also provided crucial support to the Green Revolution, which dramatically increased food production around the world. By giving away billions of dollars, he improved countless lives and left an immeasurable impact on humanity. But he also paved the way for future billionaires to use philanthropy as a tool for self-preservation. It's a strategy that continues to be highly effective to this day. But even though Rockefeller gave away tens of billions of dollars, in today's money, he was still worth tens of billions when he died. So, how is that possible? Well, the answer lies in the secret to the family's enduring power, which starts with something called the family office. It turns out that even after Rockefeller lost his empire, his wealth continued to grow thanks to the tax strategies he put in place decades earlier. But to understand these strategies, we need to rewind the clock a few decades prior. Rockefeller began the process by setting up a holding company called the Bank of New York. It may sound simple, but this was basically the very first family office. Its main purpose was to hold on to the family's assets, but it also served as a hub for managing investments, paying bills, and most importantly, protecting the family's wealth from outside threats. At the time, this was an unusual idea because most wealthy families either kept their money in banks or invested in businesses directly. But Rockefeller realized that these options were risky. Banks could collapse, losing the family fortune, or lawsuits or creditors could target the family's investments. So he created the Bank of New York as a dedicated entity focused solely on preserving wealth. This decision proved to be a masterstroke because it laid the foundation for the family's enduring wealth. However, he knew that if he simply left control of the bank to his family members, they might engage in reckless behavior or worse, squander the fortune. So he set up a series of trusts, which are legal entities that manage assets for the benefit of designated beneficiaries. But these weren't ordinary trusts. They were complex structures designed to protect the family's wealth for generations to come. The first trust was a revocable living trust. This meant that while Rockefeller was alive, he could modify or dissolve the trust as he saw fit. The trust owned shares in the Bank of New York, which in turn held the family's assets. This allowed Rockefeller to maintain control over his wealth while also ensuring that it would pass to his heirs without going through probate court, which can be a lengthy and expensive process. But Rockefeller didn't stop there. He also created something called the waterfall concept. This involved setting up multiple layers of trusts with different beneficiaries and payout structures. The idea was that the trust would provide a steady stream of income to his descendants, but that income would never exceed a certain amount. This ensured that the family's wealth wouldn't be depleted by excessive spending or poor investment decisions. Here's how it works in practice. Let's say the trust owns shares in a company that pays a dividend of $10 million per year. The first layer of the trust would receive $5 million of that dividend, which would be enough to comfortably support several generations. Any remaining dividends would then flow to subsequent layers of the trust, providing a safety buffer for future generations. But even that wasn't enough for Rockefeller. He wanted to ensure that his wealth would survive for as long as possible. So he took steps to protect his trusts from lawsuits and creditors. For example, he chose to hold most of the family's assets in non-liquid forms like real estate or privately held companies. This made it difficult for creditors to seize the assets because they couldn't be easily sold without the trust's consent. Additionally, he incorporated some of the family's holdings in low-tax jurisdictions, reducing the overall tax burden on the estate. These strategies paid off big time. Even after Rockefeller's passing, his estate was valued at $660 million, equivalent to around $20 billion today. That means that despite giving away billions over his lifetime, he still had a massive fortune left to pass on. But perhaps more importantly, his descendants have maintained their wealth and influence ever since. In fact, they've done such a good job that the Rockefeller fortune is still growing today, 120 years after its creation. That begs the question, why does the Rockefeller family continue to thrive while many other wealthy families have lost their fortunes? Well, the answer lies in their unique approach to wealth management. Unlike many wealthy families who bring in external advisors to manage their finances, the Rockefellers have maintained tight control over their assets. They've done this by keeping most of their investments within the family office, which is run by a team of experienced professionals. This allows the family to avoid the conflicts of interest and high fees associated with hiring external advisors, and it gives them greater control over their investments. They've also benefited from a lack of drama. Unlike many wealthy families, the Rockefellers have managed to avoid public scandals and squabbles that can damage a family's reputation and financial stability. They've done this by maintaining a low profile and avoiding the kind of excesses that can attract unwanted attention. And it's not just about avoiding negative publicity. The Rockefellers have also been proactive in shaping their public image. They've done this by supporting charitable causes and engaging in philanthropic activities. By giving back to society, the family has built goodwill and positive relationships that have helped them weather various economic storms. Lastly, the family has benefited from a deep understanding of economics and finance. Members of the Rockefeller family have degrees in economics and finance from prestigious universities. They've also held key positions in major financial institutions. This expertise has helped them make smart investments and avoid risky ventures, which has preserved and grown their wealth over time. All of these factors have contributed to the Rockefellers' enduring success. While other wealthy families have lost their fortunes, the Rockefellers have managed to preserve and grow theirs. It's a remarkable achievement that serves as a case study in wealth management and estate planning. And if you want to learn more about the Rockefellers, check out our other videos on David Rockefeller and the dark history of Standard Oil. Plus, don't forget to subscribe to stay up to date on all our latest content.